Hello and welcome to the Film Ireland podcast, where we delve into the stories, talent and creativity behind the Irish screen industries. In today's episode, we have something quite different for you. So have a listen to this clip from the trailer from the 1970s film Quackser Fortune Has a Cousin in the Bronx.
This is Dublin. This is my cousin Quackser. He's a man with very special interests. Some men love food, not Quackser. Some men love liquor, not Quackser. My cousin, Quackser Fortune, has a passion for, well, let's just say he picks up where others leave off.
Horse manure, fresh done.
Excuse me. Hey, do you really sell that?
Yeah,
Really?
yeah, it's my job.
This is all about Quackser and what he did to Dublin.
Yes, that was Gene Wilder doing an Irish accent opposite his co-star Margot Kidder. So this quirky comedy was set in Dublin and written by Irish playwright Gabriel Walsh. In a little while, we'll be chatting with the film's director Waris Hussein about his experience and time here. But first, we catch up with Frank Durant. Frank is a Boston filmmaker and fan of Quackser, and he came to Ireland earlier this year with his son to visit the wonderful and mostly lost locations in the film. And his trip ended with a pint of Guinness in my fabulous local, The Gravediggers. So he's joined by Meghan Mickela, a Dublin-based director herself, who's documenting Frank's journey. Great, so thanks so much for chatting with us.
Good morning.
So you're here, Frank, specifically for, or you were here just very recently for a very exciting reason. I was wondering if you could tell me about it.
Yes, well, good morning from Massachusetts. My name is Frank Durant. I'm a New England-based filmmaker and just someone who appreciates cinema in general. And yes, I got to touch down in the great city of Dublin for about a 5-hour stopover before going to Rome with my 6-year-old son. I just saw it as a wonderful opportunity to stop and have my first Guinness with my son, who I married into a big Irish family here in Holyoke, Massachusetts. So I didn't want to wait till he was a teenager. I wanted to get him into see Gravediggers, Kavanaugh's Gravediggers. And I didn't share a pint with him, but he got to hold the Guinness and we took some photos. But while I was there, I did want to pay homage to a film that I discovered during COVID, during those years of isolation, where it was such a wonderful, beautiful, unique movie that I needed to just help spread the word as a fellow filmmaker so more and more people would actually acknowledge and know of its existence.
Yeah, so you raised it with us, and shamefully, I had never seen it before. It was programmed in the I-Fi, like it has resurfaced a couple of times, but I personally, it flew under my radar, and the film itself is sort of a wonderful love story to Ireland back in the day, surprisingly featuring wonderful Gene Wilder with an Irish brogue going around the streets of Dublin, picking up horse poop as his job and living life and getting involved with romance, and then all of a sudden there's like a shift of the new versus the old. Like it's this beautiful classic film, but like even though the director isn't necessarily of Irish roots, it's so there's such a kind of humor in how it catches that natural brogue and that natural way of processing things, that real old-fashioned way of people always offering people tea. And then I think, yeah, because the writer's Irish, and I always think that's such an interesting dynamic as well when a director comes in with that fresh eyes to capture the world. So it was a joy to behold. And tell me, so when you were planning your trip, these are the places that were visited in the film?
Correct. So one of the things about the story of Quackser Fortune, I connected as an artist because I don't see any artist who doesn't see themselves as an outsider. Where I should say they are an outsider, because how many people go into the arts from general education? Waris, I think, was a perfect director for this because, and you'll speak more about this when you interview him. Waris is a brilliant filmmaker, brilliant artist, a beautiful human being. But I feel he connected with Quackser because they were both outsiders. I can't say this because I'm not Irish. I'm not of Irish descent. However, I think a lot of Irish people would see themselves as outsiders on a world stage. So I think having him direct this and tell this beautiful story. He was the perfect director to do this.
Megan, you tell me about your experience as a filmmaker and how you came on to be a part of this really wonderful pilgrimage.
Sure, yeah. So I'm an American living in Dublin mainly. I did, as many Americans do, I went to Trinity College for my master's, um, which kind of brought me over here after COVID, and I had lived here before COVID, and I studied film. I got involved in film programs across Dublin and Ireland. I did a lot of volunteering. I've done a lot of internships with different film programs, different film sources, and I've worked in development a bit. And more recently, I've been working in a cinema. So I've kind of been across all of Dublin film um, in one way or another. So that got me into it. And Frank reached out and we started talking about the film, and there were a lot of similarities. So I was very interested in taking part and getting to know this side of Dublin I hadn't seen before.
And one thing is, Megan, I never told you this before, but there were about 10 Dublin-based filmmakers who wanted to do this. So you beat them all out because I really felt you had a lot of connections to the story, especially to the Margot Kidder character, being from New England, like you're from New Hampshire. And there was just something. First of all, you have a great name. That name, you could be anything, doctor, lawyer, filmmaker. But I just saw that you came back and had a wonderful perspective of the film, where I think you were perfectly cast in this to do a partnership and really creating this wonderful story and pilgrimage of Quackser Fortune.
Thank you, Frank. That's nice to hear.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, there is so many kind of similarities in your journey. And I think it's something so wonderful as well as these were streets that have been walked for such a long period of time by different people in different guises and what has changed because there's something so timeless
Hmm.
about that story of change and being replaced and being made redundant and things shifting and how do you survive in this world when, like the pressures of getting a real job. Who doesn't identify with this? That that it's so wonderful. And I'm just wondering then, so tell me more about the shape your trip, Frank, took, and then Megan, what it was like documenting it. So did you guys have long discussions before you came over? What was the planning like? What was the aim?
Well, we spoke, I think, for months in advance about, are we just going to do a filming location video? Do we just do some interviews? Do we really do a retrospective criticism of what the film represents, of how 50 years later, how Dublin has changed so much? So we had a lot to work with where Megan has carte blanche to decide, okay, what do I do with this? Because there's so many different talking points this film represents, especially somebody who's grown up in Dublin as a time capsule of a Dublin gone by that many people can't recognize anymore.
Yeah, I think I had a lot to work with. When we started, we went to different locations. We focused mainly on gravediggers and the cemetery that surrounds it. It was a lot of conversations with Frank beforehand and looking into what this film means to people who grew up in Dublin at this time, um, and the change that it's gone through and what that signifies. So for me, it's kind of this great big task of representing that in a way that looking at all the change that it's gone through, but also appreciating what it's come to be now and how the film has represented all these different changes that it's gone through and all these different locations that it shows, um, and where they are today.
People who want to learn more about your project or people that might want to see what you have been working on, where will it end up, do you think? Where will it go?
Don't think we know just yet. I think at the moment it's still very much in production and just developing because I still haven't interviewed the director yet. I'd like to talk to him and I'd like to get more footage around Dublin. So it's still early stages at the moment, but that's a
Mhm.
great question. I think Frank, we'd have to see who was interested if we had
Mhm.
an American audience that was interested in seeing it and how who would be interested in watching it really.
As a filmmaker, or I say I'm always a filmmaker in training, I just appreciate when one artist just acknowledges the work of another artist. And I hate critics who want to criticize as opposed to a critic who wants to talk about the positive things that they took from that film or that piece of art. And already, Megan and I have accomplished just so much wonderful word of mouth from local podcasts, local journalists. I've gotten to speak with Waris, but also the Dublin Inquirer did a wonderful little story. And one of the people that wrote a comment to say thank you for coming down was the uh, Gabriel, the gentleman who wrote the screenplay for Quackser Fortune. So it's just a wonderful surprise just to let everybody know, people who worked on this film, just to show that their film, their story, their art is still resonating with people. Um, I think we've already accomplished half of what we already set out to do. I think the other half is really trying to find, if we produce just a YouTube video and send this to festivals. One thing that just recently happened is you could only see this film on bootleg copies on YouTube. Tubi just picked this up a week and a half ago. So now they actually have a digitized version of this on Tubi that anybody could watch for free. So the film's already been on YouTube for 5 years now. Why did Tubi decide all of a sudden there's an interest from people who want to see this film for the first time since the 1970s? The word of mouth is already out there. I think people who discover this film are going to not just appreciate the uniqueness, but just the connection of being a fellow outsider. If you connect with Quackster or just the people of Dublin in the late 60s, it's just a wonderful story when you're isolated at home and want to have some form of connection with a piece of cinema.
And talk to me what it was like when you guys touched ground. So, what did the day look like when you set foot in Dublin? It was a very brief turnover, like very
Mm.
early in the morning as well. What did it look like? And was there anything that surprised you seeing it in person? It's really funny as well that Gravediggers has not changed that much at all. Like the restaurant
No.
bit is different, but the actual main bit of the bar, watching the film could still be that could be filmed yesterday, more or less, if they took out some of the technology.
It's a time capsule. You walk in there and you're literally time traveling back to a time gone by. Megan could talk about this because we all shared a Guinness and we sat where Gene Wilder and Margot Kidder were at the side pub near the fireplace. And you kind of want to ask yourself, is Gene here? Is Margot here? Is their spirit still alive? Because you see a poster in the back hall, you see a news article of Gene Wilder there in 1969. And you kind of want to believe that, if they're around, they're still there, they're still present. And I hate to make this an Olive Garden commercial, but when you're in Dublin, you're family. And we talked to strangers and people at the pub, and when they heard what we were doing, they were fascinated. But it wasn't just a regular bar or tavern you would walk into. It just seemed like when you were there, you're not just there to have a drink, you're there to really share a moment with strangers and really enjoy the moment. And even though I could talk to you for hours about our experience in Italy, Dublin was just magical. It was just a magical 5 hours we spent there with Megan and other people that were there just to break bread and have a pint of Guinness.
And Megan, your job was to capture all this, was to make sure that it was like documented, was to observe the filmmaker observing on another filmmaker's film uh, in a pilgrimage form, which is very interesting. What was that like?
It was quite unique. I think it was made special also because Frank brought his son, which was really, really nice. Um, so to get to kind of introduce them to this new space where Frank had, has known so much about this film, and it was really exciting moment to be able to take him into Gravediggers and walk through the cemetery. It was great to see all these moments kind of unfolding before me. Um, and then to talk about Waris with Frank and the few people who had interviewed us from the Inquirer and various other places. It was nice to get to talk to them about the ideas we had around what we're going to be creating. Um, it was very exciting. When we were in Gravediggers, there was a group that was sitting next to us actually, and they were all from Meath Street in the Liberties. And it was just one of those moments that it was great to see Frank seeing this kind of bar culture that is so common. We see in Dublin and across Ireland that, wherever you're from, people will chat to you and you'll have a conversation. I've lived in the Liberties nearby Meath Street for the past 3 years, and it was, I'd never met these people before, and we just had this instant connection, and we were able to chat with them. And it was great to get Frank involved and see that, and his son as well. It was great for them to see this kind of cultural moment almost.
They are the characters. They are, the dubs and that kind of, yeah, that authentic friendliness that kind of everyone wants to know your business a little bit. Like there's very much so that, but in like in a very warm and
Yes, yeah.
affectionate way. But they do want to know. They want to know why you're here. What are you doing here? What's your story? If you could even give me a little bit of a blow by blow as to what the locations were like, and do you feel that the spirit of what you hope to find you found, Frank?
Well, I'll make the comparison since I'm from the Boston suburbs, Boston, Massachusetts, a wonderful Irish community in Dorchester. One of the top attractions in the Boston Common is the filming location of Good Will Hunting. A lot of people want to sit in the park bench that Robin Williams and Matt Damon sat at, and Robin Williams gave an amazing monologue there watching the swans go by. To this day, you drive by, people draw murals on the ground. They write quotes from the movie. They want to sit and take a photo of just this moment gone by of a film that people resonate with. I got that at Gravediggers. I got that walking some of the streets in Dublin. Sadly, some of the locations have been so modified that you can't find where the foundry is located. Certain things are just that whole neighborhood has been leveled. So it's almost like the spirit is gone, the vibe, the power source, if you want to call it that. Gravediggers was just such a delight, an experience of just being with friends, but you could just tell it was very powerful for the amount of people that came before us that were there, not just to make a movie, but to have conversations and to sing songs and just to be a part of a community which still exists there at Gravediggers. And really, I think represented what Dublin was, in my perspective, in the days of Quackser Fortune.
And did your son enjoy it? What was his impression?
Oh, we getting off the plane, the Aer Lingus made him sit in the captain's seat with the captain's hat. So as soon as he got off the plane, he was just adored because I had him in his Irish shirt with the Irish flag, and so everywhere we went, he was just a just treated as family. So from the cab rides to and from, everybody at the airport, and he did drink a soda. He didn't have a Guinness. He had a soda at Gravediggers, but he just every moment was just to him a dream. And I hopefully not just the photos I took of him, he'll acknowledge many years when he becomes a teenager and then a man that yes, I have been to Dublin. I was there for 5 hours with my father. So hopefully he remembers a few moments of that experience.
And have you watched the footage back, or have you sort of looked back over? Have you had time? Because I know kind of it only just happened, but you know the way that like there's like a transience to it where things have a slightly different meaning further down the line with that little bit of retrospective. Did anything kind of shift? And did anything shift in your interpretation of the film being there physically as well?
Megan, do you have an opinion on that before I start talking?
Yeah, I can add.
Sure.
I think watching back over the footage that I took, I definitely have this kind of appreciation, both watching the footage that I took and watching back the film in comparison with two. I kind of have this appreciation for a part of Dublin that I'm not often able to experience. Um, but I also have an appreciation for this place that I've made home for the past 3.5 years. Um, it's become it almost I don't always love living in Dublin. The city can be it can feel very, very isolating, and for all of its issues that we see every day, um, it was watching the movie back and thinking about this project has made me really almost romanticize what I didn't always see in the city that I've lived in for so long. So it made me appreciate a lot of things that I took for granted.
And Frank?
I hate to make the comparison to the Guinness I drank, but we're used to having Guinness come over the pond. So we're not drinking the same thing that came just 2, 3 miles down the street. So everything just seemed real. It just seemed like just a wonderful, unique experience that equals the movie itself. If anything at all, if we get more people just to watch the film, appreciate not just how far and how different Dublin has become, but to really connect with the story of the characters. I really feel it's close to being a perfect film, but I think it also resonates with everybody who watches it, and that's, in my opinion, that's half the goal of what we're setting out to accomplish.
And what was so exciting is how, and surprising, is how risque it is.
Well, in the world of cinema, Midnight Cowboy had just come out in 1969. While they were filming this in Dublin, this was during the summer of 69 with the Woodstock Festival. You had the moon landing. So you had a lot of things changing in this world with the generation at the time, which led
Not
to.
here. Not here. So
Okay.
you couldn't even get the morning after pill. Like I think into the 80s you still had to have a prescription from a doctor and be married and things. Like not here. We were like a third world, deeply conservative Catholic country. This this was not what was happening over in the States
Oh,
at
no.
all. And we never got that. We never got a sexual like
Well, that speaks true to the idea of the movie is really an outsider's perspective because Quackson never adapts. He takes what he knows and makes it works for him. He takes what he learns from Margot Kidder, but he doesn't just go into the foundry. He doesn't do what people tell him to do. He still kind of forges in his own life. And you're right. At the time, what was happening with the '70s generation of risque films coming out in cinema, right? We kind of bypassed Ireland with that. However, the film really speaks true to the outside mentality of don't conform. And yeah, just adds to the other idea of how the film is very risque for the time period.
And I did think this, that there's so much about him that I was like, whoa, I would reckon like he's so strong. He's so like he doesn't move quickly, but he listens and he adapts really well.
Well, Quack Stevens says, I'm not stupid, even though he says, I only lasted to the third or fourth grade. He is adored by many women in the neighborhood, but he recites poetry. He's a lover of the arts. He has a carnation, so he does care about personal opinion. Um, he also has an interesting work ethic. He doesn't work past 1 o'clock. So he's a creation of his community. And I think he's trying to hold on to some form of what he understands, but also to appreciate the ducks and to smell the flowers and to live a day with music every day. So I feel he's more of the, not so much the common man, but the idea of what the dream of the common man.
Was there any element of the trip that maybe surprised either of you or observing this moment? Was there anything sort of that came up that maybe was unexpected?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I don't think there was anything unexpected. I don't know. I think having or watching your kind of interactions with people, Frank, and seeing this perspective as an American who has lived over here for a long time now, or a couple of years, um, I think that my perspective watching another American come over who's you've never been here, and you have this great connection to this film, and this is what you know of Dublin, that was really interesting. Um, and it surprised me some of the things, like Frank obviously has quite a in-depth knowledge of the film. Um, so it was interesting. Maybe that surprised me that there was quite a lot that you knew of Dublin
Hmm.
without being here before, and that was all learned from the film. Um, I thought that was quite interesting. There were places that I would have never ever thought of as important or interesting at all, and Frank would have remembered it right away from scenes from the film. So that was great to hear. And um, you've already seen Trinity College and places on the river on the south side in D4 and all these different spots that I never really would have thought of. I suppose Trinity is known, but yeah, it was kind of interesting to see that and to talk to Frank about it. So
The one thing I was not total shocked because there's still traffic in Dublin, people still drive, but more and more people are relying on taxis and Ubers. So I think Quaxo would be happy that there's less fast cars on the road and more people are walking or commuting to work by feet. And I guess some people still have not horse and buggy in the downtown, but there's still farming communities that still rely on donkeys and horses to do local travel. But I was kind of shocked that hardly anybody, young people in Dublin, have their own vehicle. They rely on public transportation.
Yeah. Is there anything that if you had been given more time, you would be like, I'd love to have gone to this place. I'd love to have seen if this is still around. If you had like the full remit of a glorious like 3 or 4 days that, that like for
Mm.
the longer pilgrimage or maybe part two.
Yeah. To me, the two, Gene Wilder was interviewed back in the '90s, and when he received the screenplay for this, he said he cried. He just cried for the character. He loved such a beautiful story. And this was his first film after he'd done The Producers and his cameo with Bonnie and Clyde. So this was one of his first real starring roles. And then he went off to do Willy Wonka, and then he was just a legend from there on. The two scenes that really hit close to me is when he sits on the side of the river and he feeds the ducks. I would love just to sit there and just kind of see if that riverbank is still present as opposed. I'm sure it's there, but is it really there like it looked like back in 1969? But to me, the one of the most beautiful scenes is a turning point in the relationship between Gene Wilder and Margot Kidder's character. They're on the edge. I don't know where it is in Ireland, but they're outside of Dublin proper. And he recites poetry, and she really does. She's very not so much in love, but it was just a very beautiful moment between two young people that appreciate each other for what they were. And I thought that was a turning point of Quackser trying to really learn and evolve from what he knows being from the streets of Dublin.
Oh, sorry. I was actually gonna say the same thing. Just, I mean, obviously it's a bit different, but um, that scene in particular with the two of them, I believe it's either in Greystones or the Wicklow area, but it's along that way, and it's one of my favorite parts just outside of Dublin. You start to get the dart in that direction, and I would love to find exactly where that was shot because it's just incredible with the two of them on the cliffside there.
Maybe a part two, and then you come back, and then we'll take you for another pint somewhere else that's in the film because it's so wonderful, and I really hope you enjoyed that. And look, we really can't wait to see where it's going, where it ends up, where we can point people in the direction of watching it. And I think in the meantime, that definitely that people cast an eye on that film and really like it captures something so beautiful and in a way that is very nourishing for the soul.
Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I hope I return. That would be a wonderful experience. But no, I just hope people get a chance to watch the film, reflect, and hopefully it gets them to travel to Dublin and to have a pint at Gravediggers, of course, and just to hopefully experience just a fraction of what Quackster's Dublin was back in the day. I think it'd be a wonderful achievement.
Thank you so much, and thanks so much, and I'm delighted you did a great trip.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, everybody.
Now we are delighted to welcome Waris Hussein, who's had a long and varied career directing for film and TV since shooting Quackser Fortune Has Had a Cousin in the Bronx.
Yes, well, can I tell you that I'm very surprised after all these years that this film should have raised its head. You know what I mean? I had no idea what effect it would have on people because I did it so many years ago, and what does interest me is what is going on here, and what can I do to deal with it? Because at the time when we made it, I had no idea what we were actually working on and what effect it would have, and the whole idea of it being set. I mean, the whole point about it was that neither Gene Wilder nor I are Irish, and when we met, he asked me if I would direct him, which was odd about such a project. You know what I mean? I mean, when you think about it, it is a very unusual combination here. Gene Wilder being American, me being Indian born, being asked to do a quintessentially Irish movie written by an Irish writer. What we enjoyed was the actual subject matter, but how do we bring it to life? And I said to Gene, well, you know, what are we going to do? He said, well, we're both going to have to try our best. And so that's why I'm a bit puzzled as to the interest in it after all these years. What can we talk about?
Oh,
What can I do?
I'd love to learn about, yeah, your experience filming it. Ireland was such a different place. Also, the themes of the film about how there's a man threatened, his like existential self is being threatened. It's surprisingly modern when you watch it back. The like
It is, yes.
even for at the time, you know, the references to sex and his relationships, like Ireland was so conservative. There's nothing that we would have made that would have kind of captured that quite so well. But again, like think about it, it's one man who's living outside the box, who's you know, who's threatened of being replaced by a big shift in the world. That's very true now for people and their jobs and their livelihoods and how everything is changing so fast.
Yes, I do agree. But when we made this film, I had no idea of the social changes that we were dealing with. Of course, I was aware of them, but it was all about somebody who wants to be an independent person, an individual whose enthusiasm in life is more or less stifled by the system. And that, of course, is a theme of the story. But setting it in a particular landscape was what was my task. I mean, I had to respect the landscape that we were shooting in. I did not want to make it into a kind of comedy or anything like that, a caricature. I wanted to make his family real, you know. We created the household where he lives, his parents and his sisters, and I was careful to cast Irish actors who would give it that kind of substance. Um, because I mean, even though I come from a different background, if I'm going to deal with something, I like to study the background that I'm dealing with, um, and understand the kind of world that I'm working in. Um, and Gene and I think he was very much that kind of actor. He literally spent time with the dialogue coach, getting it right so that he didn't sound totally false. And even though there's a sort of affinity between the American and Irish accent, he, I think, studied in the way that he would actually be able to deliver the lines. And I, as a director, I think all this had happened because he'd seen a film that I'd done with an an American actress, Sandy Dennis, who was the old American girl, and she had to play an upper middle class British girl. And the reasons for all this is that these films cannot be financed without the main value of the actor taking part. And Sandy Dennis was suggested to me, and Jean saw her play an English girl and thought if she can play English under your direction, I can play Irish under yours too. So I think that's what got me the task and the job. I think he's he respected my ability to actually show some kind of, again, respect for the people we're dealing with. And that's the history of the story, and that's how I got it. I mean, because you have to understand, why did he choose me of all people? I am the least likely to be chosen. And the fact that I was chosen was a challenge. Um, I would not have let it go to someone else without being challenged. And I thought this is something I've got to really get my teeth into. And of course, what influenced me most was being in the city itself. I was not familiar with Dublin, and I chose it as a background of something that the city absolutely fascinated me because of its architecture and its extremes. I mean, you got this Georgian architecture, you got Trinity College, everything going back into history, and then you got the working class person going to factories. You know what I mean? So the juxtaposition fascinated me, um, and I tried to get it right. So that was my involvement.
God, and it's so watching it now, there's so much of that beautiful architecture has just been leveled and is glass.
Yes.
Hotels, I think there's a warmth and a community that's captured that essence. And while that's still there in certain parts of Dublin, and myself and Frank spoke about it during his travels here, they're like, okay, the Gravediggers is still there, still looks exactly the same. It's around the corner from where I live. It's beautiful. Like it's still run by the same family. It's still in that weird little nook that it's in. But so many of those inner city communities that make up the soul of the city have just been displaced, moved. The whole ethos has changed now. One of the areas I thought maybe where it was filmed, but when I looked it up, it isn't, but it's very close, is now just Google. It's just a Google and Facebook campus. It's just a bunch of big glass buildings. Like that soul is sort of gone, but you've captured the warmth and camaraderie of the community as well, struggling to survive. Like Ireland would have been so poor.
Yes.
In terms of crew, in terms of like what, like equipment, in terms of bringing all that to these spaces, because I can't imagine there was a whole lot of that scope being filmed there at the time. Like
Well,
Ardmore, sure.
yes. I mean, we built the interior Quackser house was built at the studios at Ardmore, But what I love about it is the detailing of it. You know, I mean, the whole idea of his family living in a household like that. And I was careful to cast his sisters so that they were genuine Irish girls and they gave it that authenticity. This whole idea of him getting ready to go to the dance, for instance, and the fuss being generated within the family and the mother and the father and the outside loo. I mean, all this is all very much a part of the background that we research, and the designer did me proud, I thought. Um, I mean, you don't have to be Irish to know these things. These are basic things that people value in life, you know, family life for a start, making meals and getting breakfast and waking up late in the morning. And we even rush him he gets up in the morning and he has a piss pot because there's no outside, I mean, there's no loo available. And he hums while he's doing it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He just, he greets the morning with the humming sound, which may be tuneless in itself, but and then the whole idea of him walking along, and we try to show what his job is. I mean, horse manure for a start, and his seduction of the widow, and of course the sexual elements. It's just sort of hovering in the background.
And that would be again something our own films at the time would not have been, and the very few ones that did exist. Talk to me
Yeah.
about like when that script. So when you started to go through that script with the thoughts to go into production and everything was in place. What was your process of breaking it down and getting all those nuances there?
Well, the script actually spoke to me. It didn't involve too much change because this was written by a radical Irish guy, Gabriel. Have you been in touch with Gabriel Walsh?
No, no, I was researching him. He seems, yeah, it's his background and going over to the States. He's a very interesting, again, creative person.
Well,
Yeah.
I wonder what happened. I've lost touch with Gabriel. I don't know what happened to him. Um, he was a radical himself, having gone to America. He'd gone to America, and that's why he could write about the American girl. But the fact is, he was very much a radical and decided that he was going to write about the Ireland he remembered, and that's what he created. So I didn't question that. I respected it. I didn't want to burrow too deep into what he was trying to do because I understood what he was trying to say. Myself being somebody of the same ilk, I myself have been somewhat of a radical myself because the whole point of being born in India under British colonialism, I had a kind of rebellion in me. And I saw this in the Irish, of course, history during the research of history of Ireland about how the British dominated the Irish scene. And here we speak the same language. English language is not Irish, but we speak the English language, which is presumably imposed on the Irish by the British.
Mhm.
Um, the flag colors are the same, orange, green, and white. Except we have the chakra wheel in the middle of the white. Uh, I find myself being very much in tune with the mentality of the Irish, very sympathetic to it. And the people who I met, we got on very well. I mean, in Britain, I've always been conscious of being the outsider. Not in Ireland, I didn't feel that at all. And Quackser is an outsider who is trying to, make a living within that world he lives in. The whole idea of being not a part of it, but being a part of it, to me is very much something that I responded to. Um, Not that anything like that has happened to me. I was lucky enough and privileged enough to be brought up in a landscape where it wasn't so difficult. I went to school in England and everything. I become proper little Englishman. You can probably tell by my accent. But the fact is, I don't enjoy the idea of being a colonial, and I always rebelled against the British.
And I do,
And it's call from Ireland. Oh, I see. So I don't know whether that answers any of your questions.
yeah, it does actually, and it was something I actually had in my list. I said it to Frank as well, where again, our histories are so similar that there's a shorthand there. You know how we found our independence, like very much so. What specifically happened to us is when we shirked when we became independent, Catholicism took over, and that had its own strange impact in how our community was raised. But what was interesting is Dublin inner city, it was very much so its own place because it was so poor, and like Catholicism was such a big part of it, but there was a lot more live and let live to those communities than there would be to say other parts. And I do think that seems to have been captured there. And it's obviously the eye that Gabriel brought to it.
Yes, it was. I give full credit to Gabriel with the texture of his text. I mean, he knew what he was doing, and I respected it. Um, and I liked what I was reading. I responded immediately to it. Uh, the whole idea of this city that has been a part of someone's life, and he's an outsider trying to live within it. Um, the alienation caused by industrialization which was portrayed by the mill and people marching into there was I was heavily influenced by political movies I've seen where people go in there and start checking in and putting in the attendance value with attendance sheets and bits of paper and the fact that he escaped through it was to me exactly what I felt about what it means to live in any kind of society, let alone Irish society. But the whole idea of this myth existing in Dublin, which also fascinated me because, the Georgian facade of the city is so lovely. And this is the one that the American girl inhabits.
Yeah.
We glimpse her driving her car through it all, knocking his cart around and not thinking her unthinking values, which is what I consider Americans to be. They love they love the landscape, but they're never critical of anything. They just absorb and use it and move on. That, to my mind, is American colonialism. Commercialization of society, and the fact that she leans in towards it almost like some sort of somebody being a tourist. And she uses his emotions and then leaves and goes and doesn't realize what she's done. And yet she's a sensitive girl. I didn't want to make her into a bitch, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's something very soft in her. I like to see the three dimensions of a human being. I'm directing them. If I'm directing someone who's not meant to be very pleasant, I want to know what makes them tick. Why is this person so nasty? Why are they so negative? I like to know, and I tell the actors, I said, look, just don't give me a grimace and a face. I need to know what's going on behind that facade. I mean, in my case, what I thought was so wonderful was that we found Margot Kidder, who is totally undisciplined as an actress. My script supervisor, when she first, I mean, I've got an account, I'm writing my memoirs about how I made Quackser.
Oh.
And we auditioned a lot of American girls who they were far too knowledgeable too knowing about what they were doing. Their techniques as actresses did not fit into what I thought this girl would be. I remember Margot Kidder walked into the audition and I asked her what she'd done and she said, I've done very little. I said, well, why are you here? She said, well, I heard there was an audition going on and I thought I'd give myself a chance. So I thought, oh, that's pretty daring, when you're hearing auditions going on, you just decide to come in and line up and come and see the director. I loved the way that she wasn't totally obsessed with being in the film, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
She was very casual. And walking barefoot in Dublin is what I saw her doing, which she does. And that was Margot Kidder. She herself was very much to the Canadian girl, and not utterly Hollywood, which is what appealed to me. There's something about her that was totally natural. And there's that scene where she regrets having invited him to the dance, where he's humiliated.
Yeah.
And she goes back to the hotel with him, and more or less to see her undressing to give herself, not give herself, but to be a part of his experience. And then she leaves him. But in doing that, I didn't want to see her being callous. I wanted to see her being full of sadness for the boy, for the character of Quackser. And I think she achieved it in the end. So anyway, it was all about American colonialism using and moving on, but not in a selfish way, in something in a thoughtless way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Without thought, deep thought. Anyway, that was what I did in the movie. I had no idea it would convey itself, and the film itself was odd in its. It was an odd movie, and people found it. They didn't know what to do with it. At that time, films were being made full of guile and humor and cinematic tricks, and I didn't want to use any of those. And I have to tell you, I've always been interested in. I've been watching films that have been set in Ireland so far in Dublin, written by. Sorry, the writer's name escapes me. The recent film that have been shown about the girl having an affair with a writer. Anyway, I watched.
That's gonna drive me mad. I'm gonna set in Dublin. I don't know, because I'd see most Irish films.
I also knew Edna O'Brien in London, and she, of course, wrote about being Irish.
Yeah.
And Edna fascinated me because she was a total conflict between Ireland and Britain, But maybe all of this helps me. When I got to know Edna socially, I would see her, and I would see there's a kind of vulnerability in this woman, even though she was a defiant on the part of her sex as a woman. She defended her sexuality, and I found this fascinating because of the old Irish ethic, the Catholic ethic of being sinful, and then these movies about girls who had to give up, who had children out of wedlock and giving the children up under the aegis of the convents and the nuns.
Yeah.
It fascinated me about how they had to liberate themselves. And again, it was a question of breaking out, which is what Quackser does in his own way.
Yeah.
And he's a simple soul. There's a sort of Chaplinesque quality about him. He sees the world in a very specific way. He could sing his way through it all, if necessary. His release of the horses was something I had to deal with. I thought, oh my goodness, how am I going to do this?
Yeah. And was it tricky? Because they say, what is it? Don't work with animals, don't work with kids, and then like something on that scale as well.
Yes, I know. We had one day to do that sequence, and I was terrified that the horses would not respond, but they did, thank goodness. And they all, when they were released, rushed out. It was all done for one take.
God. And in terms of, what was it like working with Gene as well?
Gene was a comedian, as you probably know, when he did the producers and things like that. Because whenever we did a take and the crew laughed at the take, he'd want a second take, and when nobody laughed, he'd say, "But Waris, nobody responded." I said, "But Gene, they've already responded initially. They're not going to repeat their reaction to what you've just done. Oh, let's do it again, please." He'd asked me to go twice on something, and I say, no, we've done it once, and I don't want to do it more than once. It happened, and it happened by itself. But he would never fight with me. He would listen.
Yeah.
And there's a little boy in it that he puts on his shoulders. We had this little boy wandering about. He was actually a little kid, a local kid. And Gene Wilder fell in love with the kid and said, "I want to adopt him." Um, I mean, he literally ingrained himself into the society we were shooting in because we had lots of extras who were genuine people there. They all agreed to be extras in it. All the people looked as if they were housewives or people passing by. And Gene literally got himself immersed in the whole landscape. I admire him for that. He really gave his time and effort to it. He didn't want to be fake, and I think I respected him for that. So we got on very well. I mean, the fact that he chose me in itself is a miracle.
Yeah.
The idea of him choosing me is fascinating. I'd like to do a scene where the two of us met, you know. Um,
Reenact it.
he must have had to think twice about meeting me and thinking, no, God, I've got to commit myself to this person. Because the film was made possible by his presence, as most films are. Once a star puts their name to a project, it can be financed. But without her, we may not have been able to finance the picture. But the thing is, he was fully aware because there's a sort of co-production credit that he has. He was sort of a silent co-producer behind it. And the people making the film were their first-time producers. They'd never made a film
Oh,
before.
wow.
So the whole thing was an experiment. They were in our hands, and we had to make sense of it. But I remember the producer. He was a typical New Yorker, and he pulled ranks like a New Yorker does. If things didn't go wrong, he would shout and yell. But that's not the point. We were. I'm used to I lived in New York, so I knew what to deal with. I was not frightened of this kind of behavior, but the fact is, we were working with a lot of amateurs, except the crew. The cameraman was a well-known cameraman, and he chose his own crew, and I knew what I wanted from them. So it was a question of my authority being respected, I suppose. I mean, I had for my life was very interesting outside the filming. I wasn't staying in a luxury hotel. I'd rented a little house up at Sandy Cove, above Dundee, and I used to be picked up and driven to the studios every day. So I wasn't living in a communal way with the crew. I was very isolated on my own. And I'd taken my two little dogs with me from England.
Oh.
In those days, there were no restrictions on animals, and I put them on a boat on the ferry. We arrived in Ireland, and I rented this house. It was totally empty, which I had to furnish with basics like a bed and chairs and a table. There was a kitchen, and I had to basically cater for myself. So I wasn't exactly having a fabulous time as a director living in a luxury hotel.
Like if you're working on those long days and then going back and having to like cook things from scratch.
Exactly. Come back and cook myself a meal. And one night I remember coming back, and there was a gate that I used to lock, keep the dogs in. I came back to find that the gate unlocked, and the dogs had disappeared into the night. And I was absolutely panic-stricken. I mean, where did they go into the roadside and probably get dangerously get run over, you know? I went into the night and I started shouting their names, hoping that nothing terrible had happened to them. And I kept calling it. This is a scene from a night. I mean, for me, shouting into the night and panicking, I'm feeling literally physically sick at the thought of losing them.
Yeah.
And then out of the darkness, they came dashing in on me. I don't know where they'd been. And they came rushing in, and they started rushing and leaping all over me. And this was kind of symbolic of what I was doing on my own in Dublin. I had no social life. I didn't meet anybody really, apart from my crew and the people I was working with. So the only time I can remember when I've been working, where I was so isolated in a landscape that I actually enjoyed very much. You could I could look down from where I was at Dunleary, and it's a busy port as we know, and we were high up and looking down. But anyway, these are my memories of working in on the film.
And thank you so much. You're so generous to chat with us.
No, not at all. Not at all. You're welcome. Thank you.
And thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more, don't forget to like and rate and subscribe to Film Ireland wherever you get your podcasts. Check out filmireland.ie for articles, events, news and reviews.